This video will demonstrate how to draw or lay out the latch plate. This figure can be found on Blackboard. This is the layout of the latch plate. So what I'm going to do today is help show you how to lay this out and draw the shapes and using your different tools and equipment. Up to this point you've been using your scale. You've also been using some of your other tools, or we're going to use the circle template today. Of course, along with the lead holder. We'll probably even have to pull out our compass for some of the other arcs. You can look at this from the Blackboard screen, or you can print it out if you need to, whatever the case. So first let's kind of break this down into geometric shapes. You see some circles and arcs. The overall shape is a large rectangle. We got some angled lines. And so I would encourage you that every drawing that you're going to lay out, that you would just look at the different geometric shapes so you can figure out where to start. Here you have a center line that goes right down the middle, and you've got these other center lines that locate the center points of the arcs and circles. You may notice that the center line right down the middle is dividing this object in half. So this is a symmetrical object about that center line. So that may be a good place to start. Now, one thing you may notice is that the units are in inches, 2 decimal places. Down here you've got this radius of 0.56. So if you'll remember, that means that every point along this arc to the center point has a distance of 0.56. This radius of 0.25 in the corners. And then you have a radius of 0.4. This center line right here, it will help you know where to start the arc. So you'll need to locate that. And then as you come around, the other center line will help you know where to end the arc. So it's very important to locate these center points for your arcs and circles. These also have tangent points with line segments attached. And so you may want to lay out the entire rectangle first. It's totally up to you. But to get started, we need to go ahead and tape down a piece of drawing media to our table. Now, in previous videos, you learned how to lay out an A-size border with a title strip. To save time, I went ahead and pre-printed from the computer a border and title strip, plus so you can see it. But please remember that you don't darken the border and title strip until you completely finish laying out your design. And so don't darken it first. Wait till the very end. You don't want to smudge it or anything. So the latch plate will go inside of this area known as the working space. So let me go ahead and grab some drafting dots and tape it down to the table. If you'll remember that procedure, grab your T-square or your parallel bar and line up either the edge of the paper, or if you already have some pre-printed line segments on the paper, you can line it up with that. You want the drawing on the sheet and the border lines to be lined up with one another. So I'm going to place my drafting dot in the upper left-hand corner. And then I like to take my other drafting dot and put it in the lower right-hand corner. That way I can adjust it by just pulling a little bit and moving the paper around. And then once I get it lined up, I'm going to go ahead and stick down the drafting dot nice and snug to the table. And then of course we'll just fasten with other two drafting dots, upper right corner, lower left corner. Remember to make the paper as flat as you can to the drawing media or to the drawing table. That way none of your tools and equipment will snag and rip the paper. Now let's look back at the latch plate and try to figure out where we're going to start laying this out. We've got all of these dimensions on here. They're going to help us size this part and help us in our layout of this latch plate. You could lay out the entire rectangle. The thing we want to make sure of is that it's centered inside of the space on the sheet. You could establish the center line first and then take measurements from there. It's really totally up to you. See, this goes down 0.6 and then 1.5 and then another distance. And so before you get in too much of a hurry, go ahead and break down and analyze where you want to start. You've got horizontal line segments, vertical line segments, and they all relate to one another. You say, well, how long are these line segments? Well, it really doesn't matter. What matters is that you take the dimensions that are given and you draw everything that you need to based on these dimensions, and then everything else will take care of itself and the design will come together. So first, let's establish this horizontal center line. Now, as you look back at your layout, this is the working space. From the top of the title strip to the top of the border line, and then in between the two border lines from left to right, this is your working space, and this is where your design goes. And so when you take this measurement right here, that's where you want to find the midpoint or the center of that space. So I'm going to take my scale and I'm going to measure and see how tall this working space is. Now as I look, it looks like it's about 7 5/8 of an inch. 7 5/8. So what we need to do is take that 7 5/8 and divide that in half. Now you can take your calculator and plug in 7 5/8 and then divide that by 2 and get your answer. Not a problem. But let me go ahead and show you another way that you can divide numbers in half. You remember, this is called an improper fraction, I think. You all have had math a lot more than I have recently, but here's some techniques that we can use in drafting. So let's start with something a little more simple. Let's start with 2 1/4. 2 1/4, and we need half of this number. So what I like to do is isolate the whole number and then ask a question. What's half of 2? Well, it's easy. The answer is 1. So we'll write down 1. And then I like to isolate the fraction. And we say, what's half of a 4th? And you go, well, that's easy. Half of 1/4 is 1/8. So let's write down 1/8. So half of 2 1/4 is 1 1/8. But what are we really saying? So let's write this out so we can see it. We're saying what's half of, and remember, of in math means multiplication, so we'll write a dot. What's half of 1/4? If you remember the equation, we'll take 1 times 1 is 1. Then we'll go 2 times 4 is 8. And that's what we're doing when we do that in our head. What's half of 1/4? And we know that equals 1/8. Just to review. Let's do another one. What's half of 1/8? Well, you do your multiplication. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 8 is 16. And so 1/2 of 1/8 equals 1/16. Notice the numerator stays the same, and then the denominator is doubled whenever you're taking 1/2 of a fraction. So 1/2, see over the pattern over here, 1/2 of 1/8 is 1/16. And so keep that in mind as you do your math in this class. Let's do another one that's a little bit different. 3/8 of an inch. So we're going to say what's half of 3/8? And we do our multiplication. So 3 times 1 is 3. 8 times 2 is 16. So 1/2 of 3/8 is 3/16. The numerator stays the same. The denominator is doubled. How about what's half of 3/16? 3 times 1 is 3. 16 times 2 is 32. So 1/2 of 3/16 is 3/32 of an inch. This is a quick way to take half of fractions. And if you have mixed numbers, then this is a really quick way to get half of a measurement that you need. Let's do another one here. What's half of 4 5/8? So we know that 1/2 of 4 is 2. And then half of 5/8, what's that going to be? Remember the pattern. What's 1/2 of? 5 times 1 is 5. 8 times 2 is 16. So half of 4 5/8 is 2 5/16. So just remember that. Take notes on this, and it'll help you a lot. So let's go back to this one, 7 5/8. Now when the whole number is odd, okay? And so we've got 7 5/8 here. When the whole number is odd, we do something a little bit different. We still isolate that number, and we know that half of 7 is 3 1/2. So what you do is you write down the whole number, 3, and you just take that half and set it aside. Just leave it alone for a minute. And then you say, well, what's half of 5/8? Now this only works, remember, when the whole number is odd, you can use this method. Half of 7 is 3 1/2. Now you take the numerator plus the denominator, and you get, correct, 13. So you write down 13. That's your numerator. Then what you do is you double the denominator. And 2 times 8 equals 16. So we write down our 16 for the denominator. So half of 7 5/8 is 3 13/16. So let's double check it. Let me grab a calculator and let's plug in this equation and make sure we did it correctly. 7 5/8 of an inch divided by 2 equals 3 13/16. Just what we got. Now a math teacher showed me this trick a few years ago, and it's really helped out in drafting. And write this down and use it any chance you get, because it'll save you a lot of time. There's no problem using the calculator, but man, if you can do this method, it'll really save you some time. Let's practice another one. Let's do what's half of 3 7/8. Half of 3 7/8. So the first thing we do is we isolate the whole number. What's half of 3? 1 1/2. So we write down 1 and set the half part. Then we go 7 plus 8 is 15. Double the denominator and you get 16. So half of 3 7/8 is 1 15/16. Let's double check it on the calculator. Three 7/8 divided by 2 is 1 15/16. Just like we did on paper. Had one math teacher that called this mental gymnastics, and that was doing these equations in your head. So I hope that gives you some new tools. Remember, this method that we just did only works when the whole number is odd. When it's even, we just do it the other way. Okay? Now, let's go back to our layout and remember the measurement from the top border line to the top of the title strip of our working space is 7 5/8 of an inch. Half of that was, what was that, 3, remember what it was? 3 13/16. So I'm going to count down and measure 3 13/16, counting by sixteenths. Remember, you could also take a little bit of a shortcut. Instead of counting all the way up to 13, you could say 4 is 16/16, and so you could say, well, this is 3 16/16, 15, 14, 13, and you can get there a little bit quicker. But you'll develop some skills like that as you go along. So now I've established where half of 7 5/8 is, and now I'm ready to draw a horizontal line that will divide the working space in half. So this half, 3 13/16. This other half, 3 13/16. This establishes the horizontal center line of our latch plate as well. Again, you can draw the entire rectangle if you want to, or you can start measuring from this center line based on the dimensions they give you, and you can measure upwards and downwards. However you want to do it is up to you. I'm just trying to help you see some different ways to do it. And so I know that from the center line down to the other center line is 1 1/2 inches. So we could establish that center line if we wanted to, from the middle center line down to this center line. But then if we wanted to get to the outside edge, we need another dimension, and that dimension is the radius of 0.56. So if we grab our calculator and we take 1.50 plus 0.56, we get the number 2.06. So 2.06 is the dimension from the horizontal center line to the outer edge down here and up here. It's 2.06. So you might say, well, Mr. Turner, how do I measure 2.06 on my scale? Well, let me grab a book here. You can do this a couple of different ways. You could grab a textbook and you could look at this decimal and millimeter equivalence chart. And we have a decimal of an inch of 0.06. So let me zoom in. Now let's see if we can find 0.06 on this chart and find a fraction that we can measure on our scale. Here's 0.06. If we follow over, it says it's 1/16 of an inch. And that will be fine. That'll be close enough. That's what it rounds to, is 0.06. 1/16 is 0.0625. It's also 0.062, and it's also 0.06. So that would be just fine. We want to be within a pencil lead width accuracy on our manual drawings. Now there's another part of your scale that we had mentioned before. Let's take another look. Remember, 1 inch on this part of the scale is divided into 50 parts, 50. So each line in each division is 0.02 inches, 0.02. And so we can go 0.02, 0.04, 0.06 on this scale. So the first line, 0.02, 4, and 6. And that's 0.06 inches if you wanted to use this side of the scale. So 1/16 of an inch in fraction, which is 0.06, or you could use that smaller scale. Let's look at 0.94 on the scale. How would we measure that? So first we'd take this part of the scale, and we'd go 0.12, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's 0.9, 0.92, 0.94 would be right there. So you could use this scale for that, or you could go back to the textbook and you could look for where 0.94 was and use this side of the scale, whatever you want to do. You're the drafter and you're responsible for accuracy, so you do what you will with it, okay? So now I'm going to establish a start point on my scale where I want to measure from and line it up with my horizontal center line. And then from this horizontal center line, I'm going to measure my distance 2.06 up, make a little dot. You can make a tick mark or a dot. I prefer a dot, whatever you want to do. And now from the horizontal center line, I'm going to measure downward 2.06. And that will locate the bottom edge of the latch plate. So let me just double check my dimensions to make sure I did it correctly. 2.06 up, 2.06 down. Now that I've established those points, I'll take my straight edge, my T-square, my parallel bar, and draw very light construction lines all the way across the paper. So now my latch plate is centered vertically in the working space. Now I need to get these two lines here. I need to get the width of the latch plate. And the total distance is 6.30. But the problem is I don't have a vertical center line located yet. So what I need to do is to find that. Because I want to get this right in the center of my working space. I know that 6.3 is here, but I'm not quite sure where to start. So I'll have to establish a vertical line somewhere so I can measure and get my distance. There's a couple of ways to do this. First thing I'm going to do is establish a center line. This distance and the width, remember, is 10.5. Half of 10.5 today is what? Yeah, notice I'm adjusting my scale and I'm measuring along that horizontal center line so my scale is nice and straight. So half of 10.5 is 5 1/4. I'm going to make a little dot. That'll establish a center line of my working space. And then now what I need to do is to take what's half of 6.30. You can use your calculator, you can do it in your head, you can do it long division like right here I'm doing. 2 goes into 6 3 times. 6, 0. 2 goes into 3 1 time. 2 times 1 is 2. 1 left over. 2 goes into 10 5 times with none left over. So half of 6.3 is 3.15. Again, you probably could have done that in your head, and that's fine. You can use a calculator, no problem. Just work it out. So now, again, it goes back to which side of the scale do I want to use? Well, you could look it up on the table or the chart. I'm going to use this side of the scale on mine. And I'm going to line this up on 3.15. Right there in the middle. Hold my scale firmly. And now from 3.15, I'm going to go to the left and mark on 0. Then I should be able to go all the way to the right on 6.3 and make a little dot as well. And by doing that, now I've centered the 6.3, and this should be the same as this. The most important thing is that you've got the 6.3 dimension accurate. The spacing we can adjust a little bit, but we've got to have our latch plate to be 6.3. So I'm going to draw these vertical center lines. Now I've got my T-square below where you can see, but I am using it to draw and to support my triangle as I do draw these line segments. So now I've established the overall outside rectangle of this latch plate, and it's centered inside the working space. Now here's another way you could do it. Here's an example of our border line and our title block. So the border, remember, was 10.5 inches. The distance of these two line segments was 6.3. Now if you take 10.5 minus 6.3, what do you get? You do the math, you got 2, you got 4. You get 4.20. That's the space left over. Now what you need to do is to take that 4.20 and divide that into 2. Divide it in half. You get 4 there. 1. Again, you can do it in your head or you do it long way. That's no problem. You got 0. Nothing remaining, so 0. Half of 4.2 is 2.10. 2.10 is the space between the border line and the outer edge of the latch plate on both sides. Now when you go to lay this out, the more important dimension is 2.10, but then that's 6.3 because that's the actual requirement for our part. So you can measure over 2.10 from either the left borderline or the right borderline. That's fine. But just pick one of them and measure the 2.10 and then measure 6.30 because that's a critical dimension. That's what the designer or the engineer gave us. Okay? So there's our basic layout. Now let's look back at our latch plate and see where we're going to go next. I think we could do this vertical line. We could do these on the bottom. I think I'm going to draw these right here on the bottom next. So you'll notice we've got some holes and we've got a 3.5 inch dimension. And then we've got a 1.6. Well, the dimension, let's see, we got to figure out how, we only have this outer edge on this left edge. So they didn't really give us a dimension from the outer edge to the 3.5, so we need to find that. Well, here it is, right here. Oh, it's that radius of 0.56. Remember, every point on that radius to the center is 0.56. So I'm going to take my scale and I'm going to measure in from the left edge inward 0.56 inches and make a little dot or a little tick mark, whatever you like. Then I'm going to take my T-square and my triangle and draw a vertical center line. Remember, really light, so you can barely see it. Doesn't have to be dark right now. We'll darken later. Now from this point, I'm going to measure over 3.5 inches to find the location not only of the point where I'm going to draw the line, but it's also going to be my vertical center line. See, right here is that point. So next I need to establish this line segment. Now it's 1.6 in the horizontal. It doesn't mean that the distance or the length of that line segment is 1.6. That's not correct. That is not the length. But the horizontal distance from this point and then up, that's 1.6, and that's how you need to locate it. Remember in a previous exercise you learned how to create line segments at different angles using your triangles and your T-square or parallel bar? Well, now we need to establish a 15-degree angle. And so I'm going to, again, adjust my triangles and get them established. Use that triangle wheel if you need to. My T-square is down below, and now I'm going to go ahead and draw a 15-degree angled line segment. And I'm just going to draw it over here. I don't know where to stop yet, so I'm just going to draw it lightly in that direction. Now I need to establish the end point, so I'm going to measure in a horizontal direction along the established line, measure over 1.6 inches, make a mark, and then I'm going to project that mark upwards until it intersects with the line that's drawn at a 15-degree angle, and there it is. So that's the length of that line segment. So I'm going to make a little dot just to know where I am. Right there. Good. Next, we need to draw this line segment. Now, this is the point we found, so now we need to draw this little line segment that goes up. They don't give me a distance, but they do give me an angle. Okay, there's the right edge. So they give me an angle of 135 degrees. Okay, 135 degrees. Now we need to know this angle right here. So you need to do a simple math problem. So remember what the angle of a line segment is, a straight angle? Right, it's 180 degrees. So I'm going to take 180 degrees, what I know, minus 135 degrees, and that's going to give me 45 degrees. So this short angle is 45 degrees. So take your 45, 45, 90 triangle, your T-square and your parallel bar, lay it on the sheet. Here, let me show you my T-square. I'm resting it, my triangle, right on the T-square. And now I'm going to draw my 45-degree line segment, very light. And I just drew it enough to intersect that vertical line segment. And that's how you locate that point. So I've drawn this horizontal line and my two angled lines using my tools and techniques. Now remember, you see, you can go up here and draw this top part, and you're going to use the same technique because it's symmetrical. So why don't you go ahead on your own and draw that upper part right there, and I'll do mine as well. So this is going to end part 1 of the latch plate, how to begin laying out this part on an A-size sheet. So you go ahead and draw the top part, and I'll see you in the next video.